Right, well, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for taking time out this evening to talk with us. I hope that Storm Dennis hasn't caused too much controversy. Poor Paul's sat here right now. Nice 2.5-hour drive back from Loughborough. Panic mode when we thought, oh, we're going to make it back for the webinar, but we're here. And that's the main thing. Right, so my name's Amie Burke. I'm the Skills Development Manager at AHDB, and I'm delighted to bring this webinar this evening on the power of listening, which sounds like some sort of 80s love ballad or something, you know. We won't sing though, will we, Paul? We'll save that for afterwards when we're finished. Yep. So I'm honoured to be joined by Paul Harris this evening. He's been making waves in this topic, very popular, so we're quite lucky to secure you. I think it's probably because it's an evening. I'm sure Mrs. Harris is not too pleased, but here we are. So tonight's webinar has been delivered as part of a campaign to tackle effective communications. So we're going to give some tools available to ensure continuous opportunities for multiple communications within the business and your personal life. So a common phrase we hear all the time in work or even at home, maybe, I know I do it myself, is, well, I told them what to do. I don't get why they didn't understand, why they not listen to me properly, or I haven't got a clue what they're on about. You know, we have these phrases constantly, don't we? You know, communication is the biggest asset, and it all starts with listening. So Paul's going to take us through that this evening. We're going to actually do a bit of a quiz, aren't we, Paul? Yeah. For those who are sat fortunately at home or at a desk, you've got a bit of pen and paper. It's just a bit of fun. For those in a car, though, you just nod along. Don't start scribbling or doing anything like that. Right, so I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I promise you I won't keep you too long before you listen to the star of the show. So everyone will be muted. However, there is a box on the right-hand side where you can add in questions, and I'll answer them as I go along. I'll ask Paul. We'll also have a bit of time at the end, so feel free to bring the questions whenever you want, really. Hopefully you can all see that box. Tonight's webinar is really popular. We've had 303 registrants. We've got 74 people currently logged in, so I think that proves that people are here and ready to listen, Paul, which is great. Good. So we're going to aim to finish about 8 o'clock. It might run over if we've got some real engaging interest. It might be shorter and we can answer questions, but as quite a few people have been interested, it will be recorded and we'll be making it available. And straight after this, after we finish, you'll be sent a survey, and we would be grateful for any feedback. If you've got any suggestions for future webinars, please use that facility. So I'd like to thank Luke, who's our digital guy behind the scenes. He's our perfect swan, as we like to say. You know, if there's any technical issues, fingers crossed, Luke will be able to get to it. There's a chat box, there's a questions box. If you're noticing any technical things, just pop it in there, and we'll do our best to rectify it as soon as possible. Right, just a quick introduction, then I promise I will stop talking. Although you won't get rid of the Brummie accent because we've got Paul, who's also a fellow Brummie. So. Look at you guys.
Brummie's united tonight. Yeah.
So as I mentioned, so I'm Amie Burke, Skills Development Manager. My role is to work with agriculture and horticultural businesses to identify and target the gaps in skills, so to help them develop the strategic approach to people management. It's all about people. It's that leadership, and it's also the personal development. I think very often people forget about themselves, and you know, that's sort of the stuff that I work on. I've worked in agriculture for about 10 years, straight out of Harper Adams. I've always focused on business improvement for farmers, and now I'm going into the people side of business, which is fantastic. I'm also qualified as a lead auditor. I've spent a number of years traveling around the world, looking at farms, looking at sort of the people side, the social audit. So a very wide spectrum. I sort of know a little bit about everything, whereas Paul, Paul, finally, I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to hand over to you, and yeah, take over.
Well, thank you, Annie. Annie, who's Annie?
I've been called a lot worse. You carry on.
I'm normally called Phil, so that's going quite well. So thanks, Amy, and welcome to everyone listening online. It's a real pleasure and honour actually to be asked to participate in this webinar with Amy. And in terms of introductions, if you've heard me speak before, you'll know that I say this to everybody really, that firstly, just to all those listening, I'm not a farmer. I don't come from a farming background. Actually, my main part of my career was in the corporate sector. I actually sold wallpaper in the 1980s, would you believe? But then I started my business about 11 years ago, and I actually fell into farming, not literally, didn't fall into a farm, but I was asked to run a workshop for Business Link. And one of the people on the course was actually an agricultural consultant. And they said, this stuff you're talking about, Paul, communication stuff and how we get on with each other, I've got a few people in farming that are not awfully good at communicating. Would you mind coming and doing a workshop? So 11 years ago, I didn't know anything about farming at all, but I went and did some work with a farming client, and without sounding cheesy, the rest, they say, is history. So now I spend, and have been for the last 5 or 6 years, all of my time in farming. I've done a lot of work in the dairy farming sector, so I do know the front and back end of a cow, which is quite good. But I'm really passionate about this industry. I think that, you know, okay, it's getting a battering in certain parts of the press at the moment, but as a career choice and as an opportunity for young people in particular, I think it's a really fantastic career. And actually, one of the challenges I hear all the time from people when I go on farm is the biggest challenge, and the reason why sometimes we leave a farm is because of the way I've been spoken to, or the way that they just don't listen to me. So I think tonight's subject matter, which fits very nicely into that whole area of communication, fits in very well with that idea of trying to improve the overall leadership and management skills and communication skills we have on farm. So that's me.
Okay, well, without further ado, you just mentioned it slightly. So why is listening so important? Why do we have this webinar on it this evening?
Right. So the first thing, sort of the overarching reason why listening is important is ultimately it is going to affect your results, either your business results, your profitability, or your results you're getting out of all of your conversations. In any aspect of our business, we have to be listening at some point. So it could be to external consultants, it could be to our staff, it could be, I don't know, many farmers go to discussion groups. So we know that listening affects the end result. So that's really one of the reasons why improving our listening skills is really, really important. So it's going to impact at some point on our business. So, but the main point, first of all, let's give you a series of reasons why we need to improve our listening skills. Have you ever misunderstood anybody, Amie?
Yeah, I think my other half would say every day.
On a regular basis, yeah. We all misunderstand each other, don't we, at times? And actually, if we're going to understand situations or, I don't know, challenges we're finding either on the farm or with our people, we can very quickly move into tell mode. We can start telling people without first understanding what is actually going on. So it might sound really obvious, but in our haste sometimes to improve a situation, we can forget the listening bit and go straight into the telling bit. So if we're going to understand what the problem is or the situation, we need to improve our listening skills. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The second one is, how are we going to learn something new if we don't stop and listen? Again, you know, many of us will know an awful lot about stuff, and particularly around the farm, but we go on courses and workshops, and the more actively and effectively we can listen, the more we're going to take away from some of those courses and workshops. So, and we do learn from others, don't we, as well? So actually being able to listen effectively to others is also really important. And if then you've got to give instructions to people, you've got to have listened first. Have you ever heard of the Chinese whispers? Where one person tells one person something, and then by the time it gets to the third or fourth person in the team, the instruction to go and, I don't know, get a particular cow out, if it's on a dairy farm, cow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, suddenly it's cow 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 by the time you get to the end. So we have to listen carefully to be able to teach others. That's another really, really important reason for listening as well. And do you ever find that it's hard to build rapport with somebody who's clearly not listening to you? Have you ever been introduced to somebody who's shaking your hands and looking over your shoulder? And that feeling of, this person really isn't interested in me at all. So in terms of building rapport with people, particularly people we meet for the first time, showing that we can listen actively helps to build that rapport. I'll talk a bit later about the importance of eye contact and in terms of building rapport as well. But if we're not listening clearly to somebody, it can break that rapport. Another reason is it builds respect from others. If we show that we are listening to somebody, I think it shows that we respect them. And similarly, it's vital, that we're actually showing to our staff and to visitors maybe that come onto our farm that we are listening to them. In fact, staff I speak to often tell me my boss doesn't listen to me. And how can they respect you if you're not being prepared to listen to them?
But equally on the other side, very often you'll have bosses say, oh, they're not listening to me, and about the staff. So it's a two-way street.
It is, which is exactly what the final point is, which is about reciprocity, which is that two-way street that you're talking about. So how can you expect your staff to listen to you if you're not demonstrating you're clearly listening to them? And if you're always in a hurry, if you've never got time for them, don't expect them to not be in a hurry when you're around or to give you time. So we often earn the right to be listened to when we are listening to other people, and that's the idea of reciprocity, if I can say the word.
That's a big word.
That's 7:15 on a Monday evening.
So clearly listening is actually a lot more important than what we probably first realised, and we're now up to 87 people listening to us, so we best get on with what the main core. So how can you tell if people are actually listening to you, Paul?
Well, should we demonstrate that by seeing if people out there are able to listen to some very simple questions? What we're going to do at this point, so this is your moment to go and grab a paper and pen if you've got one, and we're going to be asking just a series of very simple general knowledge questions, and then we're going to debrief that and find out just how clever everybody out there in the webinar world is. So I'll give you a sort of 5-second countdown before we start, so everyone's got their pens and paper to hand. Now, a few rules about this quiz. No looking up the answers on Google. If you're with anybody else, don't copy their answers because they probably have them wrong. And I am not going to repeat the question, mainly because we haven't got time tonight, okay? And so don't ask me to repeat the question in the question box. So are you ready, listeners? Here we go. If you're listening in the car, just listen along with us. So the first question we're going to be asking now is a maths question, quite straightforward. Divide 50 by a half and add 15. Write down the answer. Very simple. Good. Number 2 is a geography question. The geography question is, which was the highest mountain on Earth before Mount Everest was discovered? And if you can't spell it, just guess. If you're not sure. Okay, number 3. For all those out there who drive tractors, you should get this one correct. How many cubic meters of soil are there in a hole that measures 6 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 1 meter deep? So I'll give you those measurements again. 6 by 3 by 1. Number 4. You're keeping up. I like this question. Right, you have 2 coins which total 30p. Since one of those coins is not a 10p piece, what are the 2 coins? I'll give you an extra few seconds to think about that one. That normally gets the brains going.
It's hurting my brain. Yeah.
And number 5, a very simple question from your religious studies at school. How many animals of each species did Moses take into the ark? Remember, the animals went in, remember the song?
Oh, yeah.
So those are the 5 questions that we're going to take you through. So you're allowed to mark your own papers out there in webinar land. So let's go back to the questions again. Let's see if you got them right. So number 1, divide 50 by a half and add 15. What's the answer? Many people put 40. Who's got 40? Put your hands up. Absolutely. That's incorrect, I'm afraid. The correct answer, Amy, is actually 115, because I said divide 50 by a half, which is 0.5, which is 100, plus 15 is 115. I didn't say divide 50 in half. Right, you'll get the vibe. Second.
Cheating.
Number 2, which is the highest mountain on Earth before Mount Everest was discovered? Of course, the answer is not Mount Kilimanjaro or anything like that. It was, in fact, Mount Everest. It just hadn't been discovered. So, number 3, how much soil is in a hole that is 6 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 1 meter deep? Most people think it's 18 cubic meters. But of course, the real answer is 0, because it's a hole. There's no soil in a hole. Number 4, Yeah, this is always my favourite. You have two coins which total 30p. Since one of those coins is not a 10p piece, what are the two coins? Very simply, a 20p and a 10p. Since one of those coins is not a 10p piece, I'll explain why you didn't get it if you didn't get it at home. And the last one, the easy one, how many animals of each species did Moses take into the ark? The answer, of course, is none, because it was Noah. It wasn't Moses. So if you've been on one of my workshops, you'll know there's 5 other questions as well. So see how you did. Many of you may have got a few right, some of you may have got none right at all. So what's the point about that quiz? Now, a few things first of all. I only said the question once. If I'd repeated the question twice or 3 times, most people would have suddenly heard the trick in the question. And when we're out on farm, how often do we just give instructions once and assume that people have listened? Because if we said everything twice, that'd be really weird, wouldn't it? So we often don't repeat ourselves. We only say things once, and then we wonder why somebody hasn't heard. The second reason is, although I think I spoke quite clearly, how quickly we speak, and you and I both speak quite quickly, Amy. The speed with which we give instructions and we expect people to have listened to them can put people off. The third one, in our case, our Birmingham accents, can also be misleading to people. You know, we have a lot of people from Eastern European countries that work on our farms, and sometimes we can mishear people just purely because of their accents. As many of us know, on the farm we can have distractions, we can have noise and background noise, and that can prevent us from listening. That couldn't be an excuse tonight because it's nice and quiet. But the most important difference is how we say what we say. So when I said you have 2 coins which total 30p, since one of those coins is not a 10p piece, because I exaggerated the word not, you and many other people would have gone, not a 10p piece. So they assumed it wasn't because of the way I used my voice. So actually, what people tell me, it's often our tone of voice that affects how well people will listen to us, how well they hear our messages. It's why people fall out of text, because you can never get the tone of voice. So actually, our personalities massively affect our tone of voice, how quickly we speak, how much information we give, and all of those can put us off from hearing the information. We'll talk in a second about levels of listening, because I know if I was to do another set of questions, 5 more questions that people knew were trick questions, where would everyone's listening go? It would go up a notch because you knew you were listening out for it. So most of us are not very good at listening, and that quiz tends to prove it. If anybody got all 5 right, you can put your name in the chat box and we'll applaud.
Yeah, well, I'd quite like them to join a pub quiz with me.
Yes, exactly. So if that's sort of recognizing why we need to listen and why we're not particularly good at listening, let's have a little look at, first of all, the levels of listening. The first thing you have to remember is we have different levels of listening. The first level of listening, which we often experience with our children, is what I would call ignoring. They're just not listening to us at all. This can particularly happen on a farm. You'll know if someone's not listening because they're not looking at you, they're looking over your shoulder, they've got no awareness actually about what you're saying at all. Unless someone physically hasn't heard you, you know, that might be they're not ignoring, they just haven't heard you, which can happen across a farm. The second level of listening, which is better than ignoring, my wife will accuse me of this occasionally if I'm watching the football, it's pretending to listen. When you go, yeah, got that, yeah, got that, and you haven't got it at all. And this is a common occurrence again with staff, is that, and even with a boss, you know, you just go, yeah, got that. There are certain people that do that as well. They say, yeah, over you, which means they're pretending to listen. They're not listening at all.
I tend to do that, you know, when I'm rushing. I'll be honest, that is the one I do, and my colleagues who listen back to this, they'll probably agree and go, yeah, Amy does do that. So next time I start going, yeah, they're gonna go, no, I know you're pretending. Absolutely, you're not listening.
You're not listening, because often if we're speaking as well, we cannot be listening. The next one, which again I'm often accused by this by wife, is what's called selective listening. So is listening to really what only the bits I want to hear, and sort of going rah, putting your hands over your ears and saying I don't want to listen to the other bits. That can happen as well when we're giving instructions. So yeah, I don't mind doing that part of the job today, but I don't want to do that bit. So I almost pretend I've not heard. That's selective listening. And the level that we need to get to if we're going to be able to communicate more effectively with our staff is what I call active listening. This is where you would have been if I did another 5 questions, where your listening goes up a level and you are actually focused on what the person is saying to you. And if I have one recommendation for all those farm owners, farm leaders out there, is your staff will recognize when you are listening actively. They will know that, and they'll respect you far more for it. For those that are interested, there's a level even above active listening, which is called empathetic listening, which as a coach, I will use that at times, and maybe in reviews, when we're having reviews with staff. This is about really hearing what's not being said sometimes, understanding exactly where the person is coming from. That's empathetic listening. Is showing empathy with the person. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. It's quite. So we're currently doing these communication workshops, and one farmer said the other day, you can't hear anything with your gob open.
Absolutely.
And it's starting to really resonate with me now, thinking, yeah, it goes back to that sort of pretend listening. Yeah, because my mouth's open, I'm talking over, I'm not listening.
And often we find that when we are having a conversation with somebody and we think we're listening, actually most of us are not listening. We're simply waiting to speak.
Yeah.
When someone says something to us, particularly if we don't like what they say, we're already thinking, I know what I'm going to say to you back. And actually, we're actually thinking about what we want to say rather than thinking about what the person is saying. So listening is something that's often ignored in communication. We talk about what we're going to say, and I do a lot of work, as you know, around how we talk to each other. But all of my communication workshops begin with this concept of listening, because you can't communicate more effectively if you don't know how to listen in the first place. So should we have a look at some things that stop us from listening, some barriers to listening? Yeah. So there are lots of reasons why we might not be able to listen actively. And one of the first ones that I experience quite a lot when I go onto a farm is people are just too busy. They're preoccupied, they've got a lot on, they haven't got the bandwidth, as I call it, in the mind, and quite often a member of staff or a colleague will choose the most inopportune moment to actually ask us a question.
Yeah.
And we've just got too much going on at one time. And if someone's clearly got something important they want to ask you about, maybe sometimes it's better to say, can we talk about this later? Because I'm right in the middle of something right now. So if we're really preoccupied in the middle of something, that's often not the best time to be listening to people.
So how would you go about if somebody really, they actually want to talk to you, be preoccupied, and you know that you're not going to be able to give them the sort of time and attention that they need? How do you gently tell them you need to come at another time when they think that their message is just as urgent as you think?
So here's one of my insider secrets, okay? It's what I call saying yes by saying no.
Okay.
So when somebody comes to you and says, I only need to talk to you, no, or I've got something really important, it's got to be like, no. What you can say is something like this: look, I'd love to talk right now. I'd love to go through that right now, but I'm in the middle of just finishing this. If you can give me 5 minutes and come back, we can talk about it then.
Okay.
So I said by saying, I'd love to talk right now. And you say, yes. Then you go, but no. So you just say, yes, I'd love to talk right now, or yes, I'd love to deal with that situation right now. But if I can just finish what I'm doing, I'll be able to give you my undivided attention. That'd be okay, or something like that. Yeah?
Yeah.
That's just what I call saying yes by saying no, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's a real challenge, isn't it? When we're actually so busy that we don't know have we got the time to do it. So just move on there.
Sorry, just press this. There we
Yeah.
go.
Great. Farms, noisy places, yes?
Yes.
And often the worst place to have a conversation is right in front of the cows, or right in front of a big combine harvester, or right in a noisy yard. That is not the best place. You can't possibly be listening actively and effectively if there's lots of noise about. So I would recommend actually we move to a quieter point. So the next one is your mindset. Now, come on, Amy, admit it. There's times when you just don't want to listen, isn't there? Where you've had a bad morning, or the traffic was terrible on the way to work, and actually we just are not in the mood for listening to people, particularly if we don't like what that person's about or what they're going to say. So actually your mindset, well, if you've made up your mind about somebody, you know what, I'm just not sure that I want to listen to you today, that cannot help. So
usually when I'm arguing with the other half, and
yeah,
I don't want to hear it. Okay, I know I'm wrong, but I'm not going to admit I'm wrong. Yeah.
and we can have that on the farm, can't we, as well,
Yeah,
where we
of course.
just are not in the mood for listening to somebody on that day. This is one that we can all fall foul of, which is one of the biggest mistakes we can make is talking over somebody. You know, being in a rush, particularly to talk to people, or even worse still, have you ever finished other people's sentences? Yeah, that moment when you're talking.
That's what you mean.
Yeah. And that person, in my workshops, I often say, one of the worst things we can do is finish other people's, and everyone shouts out sentences. And I say, no breakfast. And it's that moment when you actually, someone says, no, I wasn't going to say that, actually.
Yeah.
And the rapport is completely broken. You can't be listening if you're interrupting what people are going to say. It's just not at all the right thing to do. And again, if you're a certain type of personality style that's maybe a bit more impatient, then you can be guilty of this as well. Or worse still, doing them, no one can see it in webinar land here, but when you sort of use winding up gestures,
yeah,
like get to the point.
Or nodding aggressively.
Nodding aggressively, come on, get to the point. That's a barrier to being able to listen effectively. The next one is, are we able to listen when we're tired?
No.
No. So our physical state will impact on our ability to listen effectively. A lack of sleep hugely impacts on it because it affects your concentration levels, stress, mental illness, all those things that often we don't talk about can prevent us from listening. So actually, I think, you know, if we are worried or anxious, that's when we should be speaking up. And as business owners or colleagues, we can sometimes spot when somebody needs to talk, and then we've got to be prepared to stop and listen, even if we're not feeling it ourselves. If that person's behaving maybe in a way they wouldn't normally behave, or they're quieter than normal. One of the things I often say about the physical state is we can listen with our eyes as well as our ears. We can notice that something's not quite right about somebody. So often if someone's not behaving as they would normally behave, maybe we need to listen with our eyes and just go over and check and say, are you okay? And then be prepared to sit and listen. And ourselves, sometimes we can struggle to listen if we're tired. Coffee helps.
Coffee, wine. That's quite nice because somebody has actually wrote in the question box saying listening to ourselves is also important. I mean, looking after ourselves physically and mentally, then we can listen and care for others. And you're so right, aren't you? If you don't put yourself first, you'll end up running yourself into the ground.
Absolutely. And that's where I say a barrier to performance almost is our physical state. We need to listen to what our own body is telling us. If we need peace and quiet, go and find yourself some peace and quiet. But particularly if you've got staff working for you and you're not in the right state to help them that day, then maybe best not to do the can I talk to you later, or I just need to get myself together first, or whatever. So, okay, right then. Now this, of course, for those that know the work that I do, is a huge barrier to our listening, one that I talk about a lot. It's you, it's who you are, it's our personality style. So for many of us, we will get frustrated listening to somebody just because they're not talking to us in the way that we would like to be spoken to. So there are certain people that just want to talk, get to the point quickly. Come on, Amie, just tell me what the problem is. And I don't want you to get to the point quickly. I want you to ask me how I am and how I'm doing and all that sort of jazz. And our personality styles, or clash of personality styles, can often create that inability to listen. Similarly, if somebody maybe needs a lot of information and I don't want to give all the information, then again, that's going to prevent that person really hearing the important messages. And I think, I'm fairly certain that's why the communication workshops that we're covering this at the moment.
Cover personality types, and it's quite nice when you actually you realise the personality type that you are, like you described. I like to work quite quick. I like information told to me very quickly, and equally then I prefer to tell people information quickly, whereas my colleague is the opposite, quite likes information, take your time, we all need to understand what's going on. And so yeah, there's the different styles, and when you recognise what your style is and what whether you're working with, whether it's a team, whatever,
exactly.
And it's that, okay, well, how can I adapt, and how can I adapt and meet in the middle?
And the context here is how people listen to us. So if we're not speaking in a language that works for them, again, they're not going to be able to listen as effectively. So somebody who needs more information and is blasted with very little information they're going to be confused and actually won't understand fully maybe what the instruction is. So if you're interested in the whole personality styles, then yeah, come on to the communications workshops, because you'll hear a lot more about that. And if you're all curious, you can find out more by Googling me, and you can find out more about personality styles. So we talked about why we should listen, we talked about the levels of listening, and we've talked about the barriers to listening. So what I'm going to do now is just throw at you some tips on how we can improve our listening, and then we can perhaps open it up our time for questions. So let's have a look at the first few tips then. So the first one is really obvious. As most good stuff is, it's obvious, which is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should endeavour to use them in that ratio. So how can we be listening if we're talking? That's one of the things you were saying before, is actually if we are listening twice as much as we're talking, we are far more likely to get more information, to understand more, to learn more. So just remember, and you and I like to talk.
Oh, yes.
So we have to remember sometimes just to stop and allow somebody else to fill that space. The second suggestion is, this might sound really obvious to people, but particularly if we are with other people, is to have eye contact. Not always possible if you're on the telephone, but if you're talking face to face, again, I'm sure you've heard that phrase, those of you who've got children, when you'll say to your children, look at me while I'm talking to you. That's because we say the eyes are the gateway to the soul. So we know if someone's looking at us if we've got eye contact. So if we want to listen to somebody, we need to look at them directly in the eyes. Just a little point here, don't stare. I don't mean actually a staring competition, but it does mean eye contact. Again, it's that similar situation where you're having a conversation with somebody in the yard and the visitor arrives and the person you're talking to starts looking over your shoulder. Immediately, you know they're pretending to listen now.
Yeah.
They've dropped down from the active listening level to the pretending to listen.
It's getting the balance right though, isn't it? Because I could stare at someone's eyes and then you might start feeling uncomfortable. So it is getting the balance.
Absolutely, and it's not staring competition. And also, what if you're not careful of, if you're not concentrating, you can be staring without realising you're staring.
Glazed over.
Because you're glazing over, yeah. So exactly.
I think we've all seen the glazed over look, haven't we?
Yeah, exactly. Something that's really important, I think, if you're having an important conversation with a member of staff, is what I call to make notes. Because can you imagine going to see, I don't know, somebody important like a solicitor, and you're having a half-hour conversation with a solicitor, and he just nodded at you for half an hour and never wrote anything down. What would you think about that solicitor?
They're thinking about their lunch or something else. Yeah.
They're not taking what you're saying particularly seriously. So whereas if you're with a member of staff or somebody else that you're meeting and you're sitting there and you've got a little notepad and you're making some notes as they're talking, one, it'll help you to concentrate and remember, but more importantly, it shows the other person that you are listening to what they're saying. Now, I do mean make notes, and let me do doodles whilst they're talking. But I mean,
as bad,
and particularly if you're somebody that hasn't got a particularly brilliant memory, making notes means that you can go back to them later and say, yeah, we talked about this last time, you said this before, that sort of thing. So I think making notes and having a little notepad that you carry in the top of your overalls if you're on a farm is really essential. I don't go anywhere without a notepad. I have a memory like a sieve, so I have to do that. This next tip for listening is actually quite important. We mustn't jump to conclusions. We may have somebody who we've worked with a long time, so we just know what they're going to say. Yeah. We know what they think, don't we? And actually, we don't. We can actually make some really major errors really about how we can finish people's sentences. We can talk for them. We can think that we know how they're going to respond, whereas that's not the right way to show that you're listening. I think it's really important. You have to build rapport with people first before you can understand what they're going to say. So let's not jump to conclusions too quickly. Again, you might think, respond. What do you mean by that as a tip, Paul, for listening? Well, have you ever been on a telephone call? Maybe in your car, although you shouldn't be making phone calls in your car, of course.
Yeah, of course.
On a mobile phone, and you say to somebody, are you still there? That's because they haven't responded. So if you're in a conversation with somebody, just the yeah, got that, those sorts of responses will show the other person that you're listening. It also helps you. I think somebody said, how do you stay listening actively?
Yeah, we had that question.
One of the ways to do it is to respond, because you're engaging your brain in that process. If you sit in silence and do the staring bit, actually your concentration will drift. So responding also helps us to stay in the moment, stay engaged with that person. Particularly if you're on the telephone and there's background noise and things like that, it just all helps you to show the person you're still listening and to take your own concentration as well.
In line with that, so we've had a question come through, which I think is the right time to ask in what you've just said. So the question is, how would you recommend dealing with a scenario when the conversation is the other way around and you feel like you're not being listened to by an employee or colleague, i.e. they're not giving eye contact and finishing your sentences, they're pretending to listen?
Wow. So how could you deal with that in the moment? My recommendation there would be to actually call it out, to actually observe that you've spotted it, and actually say, look, I'm not sure this conversation, I'm not sure it's actually going the way that I think is effective for both of us. Maybe we need to take it to another place if it's too noisy, for instance. You might be referring to people that walk away whilst you're talking to them. That's really annoying as well. And I'd actually point that out to somebody and say, hang on a second, we haven't finished the conversation yet. Can you come back so we can finish the conversation? So I would actually call that out to people if they're not listening.
Because they might not even think that they're being rude, but no. You know, if you make them aware of it, then
Now, if you're somebody who's a bit more introverted and the person who's more extrovert and doesn't want to have long conversations is walking away, you can just ask very politely, sorry, excuse me, can we just finish the conversation before we finish? And often people will turn around and go, oh, sorry, I thought we had.
Exactly, they're not realising what they're doing.
They thought that
it's that different personality thing again, isn't it?
It is, I'm afraid, and there are those that often don't want to listen because they want to get on to the next thing really quickly. And you can just say, I'm really sorry, but would you mind if we just finish the conversation? There's a couple more things I want to say. Isn't it?
Just another one quickly. So can you get more info if you sit parallel to somebody, the walk and talk thing?
That's it. So you sit or stand. So can you get more information if you're sitting? I think what they mean is positioning. So if you're doing a review, for instance, and you want to ask people how they feel about the business, I never say go opposite sides of the desk. You know this in terms of an interviewing type situation. Always sit not alongside them, but across the corner of a desk because it's less threatening. Often if you're out walking on the farm, walking next to somebody, they'll be more relaxed. It's a bit like that's how we walk hand in hand. So subconsciously, it's like I'm alongside you now and we can chat. Standing in a yard facing each other is actually the most antagonistic way to have a conversation. So if you can be sat down on the corner of a table, or you can have a little walk around the yard or around the parlour or whatever, side by side, that's going to be less antagonistic than standing right in front of somebody, particularly if you're the sort of person that invades people's personal space. Again, certain personality styles have quite a big personal space. They don't want you to stand in front of them. So you generally get more from somebody if you're sitting across them or walking alongside. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I didn't realise there was so much to being able to switch on to listening. There's like you said, the tone, the voice, the way you stand, etc. We'll let you carry on, and we'll ask some more questions in a minute.
Well, talking about asking questions, it's like we've rehearsed this. That's the next point, really. Is again, if we want to show that we're listening to somebody, aid our concentration, keep the rapport. It's a bit like the ratio. We need to ask questions. If you're asking questions to somebody, I would say it's a bit like digging. You know, if you were trying to put a plant in the garden and you put your spade into the soil once and dug a hole, it's not going to go very deep, is it?
No.
But if we go in the same place 3 or 4 times, it's like digging in the same place. So if we really want to find out about what a situation is or a problem someone's having, ask questions. Ask questions about the situation. It also shows you're engaged, maintains rapport with that person, and you're bound to find out more information by asking some questions.
It's a very good question come through, and I'm not sure if we're able to help answer this one, but we could find out afterwards. Is listening a skill? What about deaf people or hard of hearing? How do you have a conversation with those?
Well, clearly, if they are deaf or hard of hearing, then they're not going to be able to hear in the same way that we are. I mean, without sounding really obvious, you know, if they're partially hearing, you can always go to a quieter place because they'll struggle to hear. Again, things like, learn a little bit of sign language. The pleases and thank yous can massively build rapport. It's a bit like when we go abroad. If we could just learn please and thank you and hello and goodbye in the foreign language, it builds rapport. So I would say if you have somebody in your team that is hard of hearing or deaf, at least learn the basics of language. Or you might ask the sign language for, do you understand? Or is that clear?
Yeah.
So you could at least then ask them in their own language, in sign language, if they've understood you. Never been asked that question, but great question.
What a great question.
That is fantastic. But again, everything we talked about in terms of building rapport, looking at the person, all those things are just as relevant for somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing. And actually, sometimes I think perhaps we can be more dismissed if we have a disability like that, and someone thinks, well, I haven't got to look at you then because you can't hear me. So all the more reason to maintain eye contact and things like that.
We've had a comment coming that might help also, a bit of feedback is so this particular person in their line of work, they converse with farmers using a tablet or screen. So I guess in that scenario, if someone's hard of hearing, you can still look at face to face, have that sort of rapport, but use a tablet or a device to support. The question though in this instance is that they use it, but it's a hindrance due to the lack of face-to-face contact or distraction. Do you have any similar experiences when you've got to use a tablet, or I've got to, when I used to do my audit work, I've got to write notes and stuff, but how do you still maintain the rapport? And you're still listening, but you're trying to do two things at once?
Yeah, I got it. Actually, I come back to this name it stuff again. So often, if I go back to making notes, one of the tips on the slide here, making notes, I'll always say to somebody, look, I'm going to make some notes. Is that okay? So if I'm not looking at you, that doesn't mean I'm not listening. It means I'm making notes. So you could say to somebody, look, I'm going to be looking at the screen and point to it. That doesn't mean I'm not listening to you, So I just tell somebody that you're going to be doing that. What happens is if we don't tell someone we're going to make notes, I'm actually making notes about our conversation. You might be thinking, what's he writing down?
Yeah.
What's that about? So I would just say, name it, tell people that's what you're going to do. So it doesn't mean you've then almost got permission to break eye contact, as opposed to thinking, when he's got bored, he's now getting on his tablet. It's actually, I'm telling you, that we're going to use this device, so we're not always going to be looking at each other, but I'm still going to have that rapport with you. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Right, well, the last tip for listening is another sort of audience participation idea. So this is something called rapid repeat, or what's called the echo technique in America. And it's really good if you're tired. Did you ever speak to boring people, Amie?
No, never. Never.
So occasionally we have people that are maybe a little bit dull, or again, their tone of voice isn't that interesting. They're very monotone, talking like that. We can suddenly find that we're losing concentration. We've lost the last 10 seconds of what they've said. Or for those of you that might work in an open office like you do, I think sometimes externally, this technique helps you to occupy the busy part of your mind, which is the right-hand side of your brain, which is on alert the whole time. The right-hand sides of our brain are looking all the time, listening for more interesting things. It's why in an open plan office, you can't help but hear other people's conversations and, ooh, that sounds interesting. So this is a technique which you only need to use for about 10 to 20 seconds, and it will get your brain back engaged in what the person is saying. So what we'll do, we'll try it out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say a few words in a few moments, and what you're going to do, Amie, and you listeners out there, is you're going to repeat every word I say like an echo after every word. So as I speak, you'll repeat the word in your mind, not out loud, obviously. So, okay, so don't speak it out loud, just in your mind, like an echo as I speak the word. So I'll say a couple of sentences out loud and just follow it like an echo in your mind. So ready?
Yep. 1,
2, 3, go. Right. I'm listening actively to what Paul Harris is saying. And whilst I'm repeating what he's saying in my mind, I'm not thinking about anything else. Because you weren't, were you?
No, but it's very hard because you talked quite fast. I was like,
So but what it does instantly, if you're struggling to concentrate on what somebody's saying, just do that for 10 seconds and it will sort of bring you back in the room, bring you back into the moment. Obviously, if you speak quickly like you and I do, that's more challenging. But actually, it can be very appropriate if somebody speaks really slowly, because if you are the sort of person that likes people to speak quickly, in all the gaps, your mind is off trying to think of something else.
Yeah.
So actually, it can be really helpful for those that speak more slowly. It's called the rapid repeat technique. One of the best things I learned in terms of workshops and when I'm on courses and things like that, get a bit tired, just repeat the messaging. So those are all the top tips I've got for you for listening. So let's just go back and summarize what we've covered. So the first thing we talked about was why we need to listen and why it's important for you and your business to understand what's being said, to learn something new, to be able to teach other people, to build rapport, show respect, and get others to listen to you. So there's lots of good reasons why we need to use our listening skills. The second thing we looked at then was the levels of listening. And now you'll be able to point to your partner and go, you're on the pretend level, yeah? Or the selective level. And hopefully everybody understands that we often begin at the bottom level, which is ignoring people, right up to that level of active listening, where we're fully engaged in what the person is saying. Empathetic listening is when we're really on a one-to-one situation and understanding how that person is feeling. Then we examined the barriers to listening, and the sort of things we talked about were being preoccupied, we're just too busy, too much background noise, having the right mindset, of course, not closing our mind to stuff, interrupting others or being interrupted, that doesn't work, and really importantly, our physical state, how tired we are, how stressed we are, and then most importantly, we looked at your personality style, how that can affect your ability to listen. And then we've just pulled up some tips on how to listen more actively, such as listening more than we speak, that's really important, maintaining eye contact, making notes if that's possible and appropriate, and telling people you're going to make notes. Let's not jump to conclusions about people, that can be dangerous as well. Responding in those conversations and asking lots of questions. And I'll cover a little technique at the end called rapid repeat. So there's a whistle-stop tour of what I call the basics, even before we start to communicate, importance of listening, and hopefully now you can see we have to listen first before we can understand others, and listen first to be understood as well. So that takes us to the end of what I was going to say. Have we got time for any questions that we want to ask?
We have got quite a few questions, but firstly, thank you so much, Paul. That's given me personally a lot to take away. I think my other half is going to go for this webinar when I get home, prepare her listening skills. So as I said, we've got quite a few questions. I'll come on to them in a second. Just want to remind everybody that this presentation has been recorded. So if you've registered, you'll get the link to it, and you can share it with anybody else that you think might need to benefit from this. So we'll share that. So in addition, we'll have some tools and templates on our website. So the links to those will also be included in the email that comes out to you. And there will be a survey after this webinar. So we at AHDB can listen to your feedback. It's all about listening. Okie dokie. Right, let's get some questions then. We've got quite a few coming through. So, this is a very good one. What if the person you're speaking to is very protective of criticism and does not take it well if you challenge them?
Now, that's behind all of that is, again, the personality style stuff. So when we say challenge somebody, that, again, we need to understand people's personality styles. Some people don't mind being challenged. Some people actually who are quite direct, it's okay to be challenged. But if I'm being very defensive, my single tip is ask questions. Don't tell, ask questions. So if you say, well, what's the situation here? What are you concerned about? What's the question going to be in terms about being challenged?
We don't like the criticism, yeah.
Well, should we be challenging or should we be criticising, or should we be finding out what's going on? So I'd be asking questions, and maybe even something like, is this uncomfortable? When I challenge you this way, is this uncomfortable? Do you not like that? And they'll be going, no, because you're too critical. But you might be being critical. You might be being too challenging for that particular person. But I would just encourage you to ask them, so how would you like me to challenge you? How would you like me to ask you this? How would you like me to give you feedback? Fire questions again.
Yeah, as you say, this is what we've tried to do in the last 45 minutes is the top layer, isn't it?
Yeah,
there's so many layers.
Loads more layers underneath, exactly. Okay. And there's never a straightforward answer to most questions either.
Of course.
Okay.
So this one's just an observation. So it's quite. I really appreciate the feedback. So just an observation. Some people are unable to make eye contact for anything but the briefest of times, i.e., autism, spectral anxiety disorders. So I think it's best to avoid generalistic approaches, and I guess that goes back to understanding who you're talking with and how you go on.
Absolutely, and in 45 minutes, all you can give is an overview of some tips and ideas. This is why I come back to the staring. Eye contact is important to show that we're listening, But if somebody's really uncomfortable with eye contact, then staring them out is not going to make them feel more comfortable. So what I would say in terms of, I go back to listening with your eyes, is the best way to build rapport is to mirror what the person is doing. So if they're really uncomfortable looking at you, don't sort of move your head and try and catch their eyes. Just accept they're feeling uncomfortable. And as you say, for certain conditions, it's very uncomfortable to look at somebody directly in the eyes. So yeah, it's appropriate to the person rather than as a complete general comment. Great question.
Okay.
That's a really good observation as well.
Very good. So maybe if a talking, listening encounter hasn't worked out, I guess we shouldn't feel bad about that and try another day after reflecting on that encounter, or even talk this through with a supervisor or trusted friend and try a different or new listening style. That's another good observation.
Absolutely, great observation. Yeah, because sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes we don't. For whatever reason, the conversation hasn't gone well, but we can learn from each of those. Hopefully, pick up some of the tips that we talked about here. And I really love the idea of don't be general as well. So certainly all the tips I've given are general tips, and they need to be pulled down into being more specific with
and the ones that suit.
Which is why I come back to my personality style stuff. Everything starts with what's right for each person.
Okay, so we've got a question. Do you have any tips for listening effectively on the telephone? Good question. When you can't use the skills such as eye contact and positive body language? That's a good question.
It is a great one. The absolute most important one for listening on the telephone is responding. Remember I said about the yeah, absolutely, yeah, I got that, yeah, right, yeah, okay. Because what that does, it shows you that you're listening to them, but like I said before, it keeps your concentration going. If you just listen for a long time without responding, your brain again will start looking for other things to listen to. If you're in the car, it might hear traffic or music. So responding, I think, would be my biggest tip for listening on the telephone.
Okay, right. So I'm just trying to get the rest through. I'm having a great job with this. So I was interrupted several times today while trying to teach a member of staff why to fill in a form. In the end, I said, no, listen. Do you think this comes across a little aggressive?
I'm going to sound like a politician again. It all comes back down to your personality style and their personality style. So if you're trying to teach a member of staff why they need to fill in a form, I assume if they said no, listen, they must have been challenging it as to why they need to fill in the form. So always what I would say was stop the conversation. Let's just stop and start again here. So that's what I would say rather than no, listen. Do you think this comes across as a little aggressive? It could do, yes. I would maybe even say, look, if I'm going to explain this correctly, can I just finish explaining it first and then you ask questions at the end?
It's quite frustrating though, isn't it? Because it's quite an important thing to that person, that business. It's it's a set of instructions, and that person's not listening.
Just going back to that particular question, I think I talk a lot in communication about why. You always explain why you want to do something. So I don't know how much time is spent as to why that person needed to fill in the form. We often go straight into, can you just fill in this form for me? Whereas if we explain why we're doing what we're doing, often people will buy into it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I know personally, if I understand why I'm doing something, I would,
And particularly for those personality styles that require the detail and are a bit more procedure based, they can't function without the why and the how. Whereas other people just want the what and the when. So just tell them what I need to do and let's crack on with it. Yeah. So maybe it's with that particular instance, it was that person taking a bit more time to explain why.
This is a fantastic question, and I would say we have this at every workshop, no matter whether it's communication, succession planning, whether it's leadership or whatever the topic is. It always comes down to, how do I explain this to an older member of the family? Not necessarily older, but somebody more senior, where you don't feel like you can be so honest and open, or feel like you're going to be disrespectful. How do you get across to them that they're bad at listening?
Again, I'm going to sound a bit like a stuck record here, but it comes back to knowing the personality style of the person you want to talk to. So when we say they're bad at listening, if they don't want to hear all the information that we want to give them, we assume they're bad at listening. But that might not be the case. They just don't want to have all the information. If there's somebody who's quite direct, I tell them quite directly, yeah, you're bad at listening. If there's somebody who's a bit more sensitive, then I'll be more sensitive to them that this is not working. I really need to have a conversation with you that's important, but I feel like you're not listening to me. If that person's an emotional person as well, and that language of I feel you're not listening to me, will respond. If they're not, and I'm an emotional person, and the other person's not like that, and I say, I feel you're not listening to me, they'll just go, yes, I am. So it comes back to why you need to be on Kim's communication workshop, is to understand how you can spot how to talk to these people. But ultimately, you know, I love the older member of the family, is just be respectful. You know, if they are part of the family, just talk to them honestly about that. I just don't feel that you're listening to me.
It's that unconscious thing, isn't it? You don't realise what you're doing. If someone pulls you up on it, you know, you're gonna.
Frequently we think we're misunderstood or not listened to, but it's just because we're not explaining it in the right way to that person.
Right, so we don't have any time for any more questions, but what we'll do is we'll pull the questions off and we'll let you answer them.
Yeah, sure.
Is that all right? And then we'll get back to people. So a couple more. So next steps, as Paul's alluded to a couple of times, we've got these communication workshops currently running. If you go on the AHDB events page on our website, you'll see the communication workshops. There's still a few places, quite a few of them are fully booked, but get on there. Otherwise, all the tools and templates will be ready by the end of March for those workshops. Our next webinar is Monday the 23rd of April, St George's Day, and it's on the future of skills. So just ensure you don't miss out. There's a keep in touch form on our website. If you fill that in, make sure you tick all the boxes. You'll never miss out on anything ever again. Okay, and then so just a final thank you. So thank you very much, Paul, for sharing all your knowledge. We really appreciate that. I know, as I say, I know you're busy, and thanks for making such an effort coming across from Loughborough in Storm Dennis. Thanks everyone for listening in. We really do appreciate it, and please do be open eyes with your feedback. We want to know what else you want to listen to, listening being the key one. Big thanks to Luke. I know we did have a few technical issues at the start. We apologise about that. Hopefully when you listen back, you should be able to catch the fun at the beginning that some people didn't get. And as I say, the recording will be available shortly, and we'll send a link out for that. Finally, good night, and I hope you all stay safe in the storm, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks very much. Good to speak to you. Take care.
Thank you.